Hello and welcome to Upstage Downstage.
With me, Richard Platt, seated in the upper circle.
And me, Stephen Rees, seated in a cheap seat. This is the Theatre Podcast, where we discuss productions we've seen, things we've liked and may not have liked, giving our complete unprofessional and non-biased opinions.
So grab a brew, take a seat and let's raise that curtain.
On today's episode, we'll be discussing Animal Farm. We saw the current national touring production at the Theatre Royal Nottingham on the 9th of April 2022. This brand new production, adapted and directed by Robert Icke, is a reimagined take on a fairy tale by George Orwell, which features puppetry by Toby Ollie. So Richard, what's it all about?
The animals of Manor Farm drive the farmer out, foretold by the old Major, the prize boar, from a dream prompting their revolution after his death. Running the farm themselves in their liberated state, the animals begin to see a new corrupt hierarchy of pigs emerging. Animal Farm was Orwell's response to Russia's descent into dictatorship after the revolution, utilising animals to think about humans and the way in which power structures and hierarchies form.
So with all that said, let's set the scene! So Richard, what are your first impressions of the set and the layout of Animal Farm? For the listeners out there, you'll be able to see our stage pictures on social media.
When we walked into the theatre, we were presented with industrial size panels that just sort of intimated that you were in a barn or a farm building. So it was very nondescript, but it actually helped set the scene to a industrial style building with not a lot to the imagination. We were presented with what I did think was really useful was on some of the trussing. There was pigeons sat on the top of the trussing to sort of intimate that they're the top of the rafters in the building, so you didn't feel like it was technically used. It was there for a reason.
We could actually see this because we had front row seats, and what I found quite nice was about because we saw this on the matinee, so 2:30 start, at about 2:20 to 2:25, whilst everyone was mulling around getting their seats, picking the noses and finding the sweets, they had Mr. Jones the butcher come across just carrying a pig every now and again and walking back. So that was quite a nice introduction.
Might be worth saying it was half a pig.
It was half a pig.
Very Damien Hirst.
Yes, we were doing a bit of time and motion. It'll be quicker just to bring the whole pig all at one go. But I think it just led us to see something. I think it led us to believe that the animals were, in the meantime, before this started, that before the revolution, this is what's happening all the time, that they're going out to the slaughterhouse or butchers.
It was very obvious that they're being processed to become food basically.
Man's product.
Yeah.
So how do you think the space was utilised?
I thought the space was utilised really well. When the production started, it was very bare stage, black stage work where it was all done with props and barely any scenery staging. It was all very much the four screens you were presented with at the start were very much used as scene changers, as wipes on stage to make sure that when they changed the scene, they hid movements off stage by moving the tabs across the characters behind. So I thought it was really well used because it was very heavily relying on puppets and the movement of puppets, and I thought they were really well designed.
Yes, the whole stage was utilised all the way because when they introduced the Boxer, which was a huge puppet horse, for the majority of the time, well, before his introduction, it was hidden very neatly, but I think, was it attached to one of the back tabs when they brought it down for his first introduction? Because it had hooks on it. So I had imagined he was hooked onto the framework at the back. You know how Molly was?
Yeah.
If he was there off stage, so you couldn't see him either side, and then brought down, and then they utilised him from that moment onwards.
Yeah, because I suppose
got in from behind.
Yes,
throughout all the scene changes and everything, just every inch of the stage was utilised.
Yeah, they did a lot of work in blackouts, and lighting was very well used, where even though it was a very bare stage, they did it very cleverly where you didn't see a lot of the movements and things behind the scenes. And sitting at the front, it's a giveaway if you can see those things happening. So I thought it was really cleverly done in that way.
And because we were sat on the front, we did manage to see just one stagehand just open a curtain for one artist to get through. Well, it was a butcher, wasn't it?
The butcher at the start for the preset.
I quite like seeing them because
it makes you realise that everybody's involved in the production.
And it is a show.
Definitely.
So what do you think about the writing? I mean, on any normal production we would talk about the writing, but with the adaptation by Robert Icke of the famous George Orwell Wells fairy tale book,
Yeah.
Animal Farm, and they didn't stray too far from the plot and the story. There was a few character changes. That most notably for me, Benjamin was a donkey, but in this show he was the goat, whereas Muriel was the goat in the story, and a few little other little bits and bobs were left behind. But to tell the story overall, it didn't take anything from that.
I think writing wise, it was done in such a way, because when we walked in the room, we didn't realise until we actually got there that, well, I didn't personally, that it was actually there was no interval for the piece. So it is also a very intense piece of theatre because there was no stop in the script.
Yeah, there was no break between each act, and I think it worked really well for this piece because it was a very dramatic and forceful, powerful play.
Yeah.
And I think it needed to be because of the story that it was portraying.
Yeah, and I think it is a risk to do something that's a one piece of theatre with no interval. A piece of theatre like that has to grab you. It's got to be something that gets you the minute you start watching it and you don't get bored, because you can get fidgety if you realise how long you've actually been sat there for one act piece of theatre.
With the adaptation by Robert Icke, I think it worked extremely well, and I understand why certain aspects of the fairy tale, certain storylines were dropped or just made to be like a passing comment for timing reasons as well, because they could utilise a little bit more, therefore extending the play to then incorporating an interval. But by doing that, you'd take away the elements of the powerfulness. So I think without that, without adding those extra little pieces and storylines and telling every little detail of this fairy tale, because at the end of the day, it's a written story and it's not a script.
Yeah.
I think the pace and the writing, well, I say the writing, the adaptation and the script worked extremely well for this production. It gave us exactly what we needed and exactly what I thought the play was about. This delivered in spades.
I think it was definitely in a roller coaster. You felt like you'd hit the ground running.
Very dramatic.
You hit the ground running and they didn't stop. And in some ways, because of the story, it needed to have that pace because you needed to be hooked the minute you walked in.
So, Richard, are you familiar with this story?
Yeah, I did see a musical quite many years ago that was a similar ilk. It was based on Animal Farm.
It was a musical?
Yeah, it was a musical.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There's a musical.
I've only recently read Animal Farm. I never did it at school. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's only a 10-chapter fairy story. I loved the writing of it, and I could understand, I could see these characters, these animals portray certain characters. And
I think basically because the story is written based on animals, people forget that actually there's a deeper meaning to it. It's actually talking about political parties, how people can control a country, how people can change things that actually mean that...
How corrupt people are, the hierarchy.
And how opportunistic people are as well.
It's basically a power game.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And the struggles that we see all the time throughout whatever political system is in power, they always seem to power corrupts.
Well, they twist and turn things to actually mean that their end result is what they want, not what the country want, and it just shows how corruption can easily change. And I think that was very evident in the play because the way they'd actually done it on stage, where
it's actually well timed that they've got this piece out now, simply because of what we've been through the last 2 years and the things that's happening in Ukraine right now. I think a lot of people have become a lot more political.
I think also they've become more aware of what things, and I think it's quite interesting at the moment where governments are maybe not as able to control its people in a way because they can't control everything about them. They try, but there's...
Well, the UK government have their own sage and nudge unit to direct people in a certain way to follow a certain pattern and a certain way of behaviour, and you see that brought out in Animal Farm as well. You must do this for the good. You don't want the old farmer, you don't want Farmer Jones coming back or the humans coming back. You must do this, and we saw that throughout the whole pandemic, the vaccines.
I think the way that the piece of theatre makes you sit back and realise is, even though it's done in I'd almost say cartoon animated like production, you can reference so many things in real life from what you see.
And I think also with this production, when one of the pigs, Snowball, was talking, talking, that voice sounded I don't know if they meant to do it, but it sounded slightly like a load of baffle gab, like Boris Johnson.
It was very public schoolboy. It was very recognisable as somebody that's highly educated that people will listen to.
Yes, baffling on, waffling on. And also when the pigs decided that they could walk on 2 feet, and as the story progressed, Squealer ended up walking around, slightly imposing a little bit of Margaret Thatcher as well going on there. I think the characters are there to portray certain characteristics which a lot of political people will be.
Yeah, and I think relating to the fact that this original book was published in 1945, George Orwell's writing stands up now because the references are still the same and they're still there, and it's still...
And the same goes for 1984 as well
struggle.
by his.
Yeah, still a power struggle. So it's very before its time, but it's something that happens, it repeats, and I think that's interesting.
And I think it makes you wonder now what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. If whatever happens to Ukraine is the same thing going to happen with the pigs taking over, for example.
Yeah, I think what you realise is almost these books are written in a way that they're almost like a manual on how to control a country or a state. You know, if you use this model, it would work, you know, and I think that's the scary thing about George Orwell's writing. It's very, very well crafted and written.
But it's also telling the story that socialism is some sort of utopia. Everyone is equal. We can all do this. But then, and that capitalism is bad. But when you follow that pattern at the same time, going for utopia, power then ensues and power grabs and the greed and then you form humans, just like animals, have that hierarchy of being the top dog to make things happen, to achieve something. There's that natural order and power.
And what it also shows is there might be a natural hierarchy and power, but what this actually shows is people decide who that hierarchy is and who that power is. They assume the role that they are more superior by preventing other people, like the animals were prevented from reading so that only the pigs could read. But it's an unnatural power in the sense of they're messing with the food chain. Well, and that's because they want control. And
they encourage all animals at the beginning of this utopian animal farm. All animals should read to educate themselves, because if you're educated, you can't be a slave. And then, as it progressed, leave all the important stuff for the intelligent people.
For the intelligent pigs.
Exactly.
And it's like, you know, and it's all of a sudden the commandments they create at the start, they change and edit to suit their needs and not the whole animal population.
Which we're witnessing, or we have witnessed in current day. They change their opinions, they change the laws to suit what their needs are at that particular time. Changing the goalposts, doing U-turns, that sort of political messaging. You know, which way, like when governments do polls as to are they supported, are they not. You know, we've been voted into power to do this, but actually to keep us in power, we need to go with whoever's the loudest and what their opinions are. So we change our opinions and change what we're here to do. And we see that time and time again with our own political system.
Yeah, definitely. And yes, I mean, Animal Farm portrays things as extreme.
But we all feel that revolt. We want to have a revolution, so everyone's equal, everything is fair.
But what it shows is that people capitalise on that revolution for their own gain. And I think that's what Animal Farm portrays. It's, yes, revolution happens, but there's always a gain from in some way or some point.
Well, it just shows that when you want something like socialism, if you do want socialism, it's as if one can't work without the other. To make things happen, you need capitalism. Otherwise, nothing works.
Well, and it showed because
there's no incentive.
It started very socialist, and but then it still turned back to the pigs making money out of the land, making money out of the animals, putting demands, making them work. Where they were basically their aim was to become human, and it doesn't give any spoilers away because really, at the end of the day, the book's been in circulation since 1945, so it's not an unknown thing, but it's just to show that the end game was to actually become equal to man rather than separate.
This episode is going to be slightly different than our usual discussions in the fact that we're not going to be here for the drama. We're going to be here for the overall dramatic piece in which this play is. Because this was physical theatre, the puppeteers all had roles to do, which was being the puppets of all these animals and therefore vocally doing the animal sound effects. However, the audible dialogue was pre-recorded. So we're not going to discuss the drama per se, but the production as a whole. We've actually got got two directors for this. We've got Robert Icke, who didn't just adapt the play, but he directed the piece. But we've also got the direction in terms of the puppetry director, Toby Ollie. So Richard, tell me, what did you think about the direction? Because I thought it was extremely good.
Well, having realised that he's one of the people that was involved in Warhorse and the direction of animal movement in that production, it really showed that he knew his craft on how an animal form or a human form actually moves, and these puppets imitate very well a true animal movement. And I think the way that they used the puppeteers to actually create the animal movement, it was really well done, and I think that you believe that those animals were real on stage. You know, right the way up from a chicken and a pigeon and a little tiny bird all the way up to a shire horse, you really knew what those animals, each one had different movements. And, you know, hats off to the puppeteers. They weren't just a puppeteer for one animal. They were going off stage, they were picking up another puppet, they were doing another animal, and every time they were performing with a different type of movement or a different type of thing. Just simple things. You noticed there was times when they made the animals look scared and they were shaking, and there were times when they were shocked, they were sad, and I think they just made it very evident that that's what animals actually do in real life.
And I don't know about you, Richard, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. They were so on the ball. They were here, there and everywhere, changing animals, and some of them worked in teams. So you got two people probably doing the pigs. One was the back end of a pig. Sounds a bit nasty, but one was the back end of a pig or one of the animals, and the others worked the mouth movement and the head. And some of them worked in threes, either being the horse, these big horse, or Boxer or Clover. And they mixed up, and sometimes they did one person just doing the chicken or the bird.
Yeah, and I think also they utilised the stage well, they utilised the space that they got.
And they never stopped, did they? They were rushing about. You could see, front row seats, you could actually see the sweat dripping off some of these artists.
They did not stop. The amount of work they had to put in to actually move these animals around, because normally an actor on stage would be that one actor performing with another actor next to them. This was 3 or 4 people running around doing the same pieces.
Working as a team to make that animal move.
And it very much was teamwork, because the amount of movement that they had to do, because it got progressively busier and heavier, and there were scenes towards the end where the farmers came back and there was a lot of fighting and animals lost their lives.
Yeah, so some of the puppeteers, because their particular character of animal wasn't in that scene, they doubled up to be the farmers.
Yes.
So they utilised their own voice for those, I suppose, live action moments where, because it was voiceovers for the animals, they could utilise their voices for the sound effects of the chickens or the geese or the pigs or the dog in some instances.
It gave that live element and that realism to the animals.
But also I felt, because they weren't speaking, they had to make sure that the audience could see which animal was speaking. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot more movement and physical movement at that, making sure that when the pig was talking, it wasn't just its mouth that was moving, the whole body was moving and looking in different directions.
And the puppets had been made in such a way where the bigger puppets were sectioned in the right places to imitate the limbs movement and the body movement, just to add more realism.
There was a lot of detail as well, because when the chickens, when they were flying down from the ledge that they were on, or just getting in a bit of a state, they'd had these feathers that just flew off, like just natural chickens would.
Yeah, they shed the feathers naturally and they grow back. It was just those extra moments where it just felt right, and I think that has such an effect when you're watching something.
And the best thing about sitting at the front of it, you just got to see some amazing views, like the puppeteer's buttocks. Amazing views. So for the majority of the animals, when you've got the birds and the crow and the chickens and the geese, they were pretty much single entities, weren't they?
Yeah.
And the cat. The likes of the dog and the goat, the horse and the pig and the cow, they were done as a duo, weren't they?
Yeah, or trio when it was the bigger animals, the
bigger
larger animals, because of the amount of support you needed to actually raise those animals.
And the puppets themselves were absolutely stunning. The way they were designed were just amazing.
Yeah,
you know, what was good about this, which we'll go on to the next segment, was we didn't just have, for example, a great big huge animal in Boxer with this horse, but we also had miniature versions of certain animals when they were doing things at a distance.
Well, one thing I'd like to say about the sort of design of the puppets was they were made out of almost farmyard materials. So they were made using Hessian and natural materials that lent themselves well to the look of the animal themselves in those scenes. So you felt almost like they'd grown from the sacking material that would be used in a farm. Plastic that was used for the dog, for the actual shaggy dog, gave you the feel that it was the natural movement of that animal's fur.
And also the frayed elements of fabric, which helped for the pig's ears as well.
It gave you a little bit look of an aged look. There was nothing pristine about each of the animals, which for me, that makes it feel more real rather than a cardboard cutout of an animal. It felt more like they have lived and they've grown up and they'd got their imperfection. They weren't all perfect in the design, and I think that helps sort of relate to the animals a little more because you can see that rough edgedness. You know, we're not at Crufts, it was on a farmyard.
So moving on to our next segment.
What the tech is this?
So Richard, being the techie between us, what did you think about the sound, the lighting, the special effects used in this production of Animal Farm?
I feel that if anybody wants to learn how to use sound effects and voiceovers effectively, they need to buy a ticket.
Yeah, this show is brilliant for that.
This was an absolute...
It's a masterpiece.
Masterpiece. Because...
Masterpiece of creativity.
It was a masterpiece of creativity, but it was also a masterpiece on how to make these voiceovers believable, that they were on stage, they weren't pre-recorded, because I didn't feel that you knew they were pre-recorded. It was done in such a way where you thought the voice actors were just off stage. You felt like they were talking in the right way, the right moments.
Yes, and we had some voices by Gary Cooper, Robert Glenister, and even like Juliet Stevenson, to name a few.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it showed that they will have acted and recorded those in such a way. And hats off to Tom Gibbons, the sound designer and music, because his vision for how the sound was portrayed on stage. Voiceovers were positioned in such a way that you felt like they were being moved around stage. It was very much done in a stereo way, where you knew who was talking at what point, and all the animals had the nuances in each of the voices. You knew who was who, and I think that lent itself really well to this production.
Yes, as an example of that, in one particular scene when Boxer is hurt and he's being carted off to the vet supposedly, we heard the sound effects of him being put into this container, and then Clover, we heard her voice saying, "Get out, Boxer, get out." But that was done so we knew it was from behind the stage.
Yeah, and
because of the way Boxer was facing.
Stage, you'd got a complete empty stage, and you still felt like the space had been created just using sound effects and very minimal lighting. So yeah, hats off to Tom Gibbons. I think that this was a really well put together piece of theatre where, in a way, it makes it transportable and easy. I mean, the puppeteers themselves work really hard because when everything is pre-recorded, there's no room for error. You can't stop and start a production like this, and I can understand why it was a one-act piece of theatre, because you've just got to go for it, and you know, you can't hide behind misstep on words, you can't hide behind not being in your places on time, because when everything is pre-recorded, you have got to be on the ball. It just worked really well.
What I thought was really good, which I suppose harks back to the directing in a little bit here, was when it came to the fight scenes, they went in slow motion with some of them before it then picked back up again. But to aid with that direction, there was a dramatic piece of music or something. It just went slightly classical for a little bit whilst they were doing those slow movements when the animals start fighting Mr. Jones at the very beginning, and then near the end when all the farmers come back, when it was pretty much a bloodshed. And the way the sound helped during those fight scenes, the music just
it swelled and pushed it made
it advanced the actual scene, and with the direction, because you then saw the animals on a side view and then they switched it round so they were front on, and it went from the direction to the sound to the lighting to the music. It all happened, it was all choreographed in one piece. And technically, when the attack by the farmers to Animal Farm, we then went from real life puppets, big puppets at that, that to then them doing smaller model puppets with the Land Rovers going through each building on the farm, and then the moment they went off stage, you then had complete blackness with these two lamps at the front, which were headlamps of the car.
Yeah.
And then you saw at the front some of these animals just being trampled by the Land Rovers.
Yeah, definitely.
And they charged at you from the back of the stage straight to the front, and then bang, the lights went off.
Yeah, and it made you move and it made you react, and as an audience member, it gave you that thrill.
That heart-pumping thing, because the music was behind it, giving you the beats to feel that way. The action was...
And I think another special mention is I'm really big on sound effects being a big part of the production, and if they use well, and they used with a purpose. One of the other things was they actually got gunshots right, and a lot of productions don't. The whole front row jumped when the first gunshot went off, because the farmer came out with the double-barrel shotgun, and when that gunshot went off, people jumped, and you could feel it. And that means for me, a shotgun should make you jump. It's a loud piece of equipment, it's a loud gun. It sort of set the scene. The minute that gunshot went off, you knew the production wasn't messing about, they meant business.
I don't know about you, Richard, but with everything going together, it did feel like a massacre.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a massacre, but the way they utilised everything,
definitely.
You know, the guns, it was just like a roller coaster of just everything coming at you, sound, visuals, all in one go.
Yeah.
But how did that make you feel?
It built your emotion up, because, I mean, halfway through the massacre of killing farm animals, when they put the cat in the bag and smashed it on the floor, obviously it's a puppet, but you still felt for those animals, and it just made you feel everything was happening so quick. You just felt that it was all happening.
Yeah, we were connected to those animals, and at one point I didn't know whether to cry or not. It was like, I'm feeling this. And then I thought, if I was in a war zone and these were people, how would I react?
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm getting like this over drumming puppets on the stage?
And I think
it got to me.
And I think to add to that, they were projecting the names and the ages of the animals on the stage to actually intimate that their deaths had just happened, rather than seeing the death.
And that was very powerful.
And you just got told how many. And obviously towards the end, because it was turning into a massacre, they kept flashing up all the names very quickly, and it just became overwhelming. And I
can understand why they did that, and I would have done that. I think that was great. The only downside to that was sitting on the front, the screen was just too high for us to lean up to see. What I would have probably done is had that screen either on the sides or right at the very back behind up on the wall.
Or a repeated screen somewhere else. It didn't help with, I mean, to me, the front 2 or 3 rows may not have been able to see that either.
I suppose this brings us to a little segment we don't normally do. What would you change?
Right.
Or what niggled you?
What niggled me?
What's your upstage, downstage bits on this? Well, the highs and the lows.
Well, the lows, I'd say that there was a decision by the technicians to put a front row of lights and speakers right across the front of the stage.
Yeah, they didn't help.
Where, because the animals were very low of stage, because obviously the puppets themselves were actually almost all below waist height generally.
Sometimes we couldn't see the chickens or the geese if they were laying down. And then, but mid stage to backstage.
And there were certain elements where you just couldn't see those puppets. But I don't think it was just the front row that would have been affected. I think that at least 3 or 4 rows back would have had that obstruction. It just seemed a very strange setup when you were running a bare stage production where there was nothing on stage, and then these whacking great technical lights and speakers in front of the actual performance.
I think that's probably down to the venue.
It may have been down to the venue
in the stage, because I think if they toured it somewhere else,
it may have been better at another production. I did question the use of those lights, because I only saw them used once, so that did make me question why they'd put them there. They might have looked good from a technician's point of view, but for me, from a performance point of view, I do think it was a misstep.
Yes, that was unfortunate seating on our part. I would say, like we've just commented on the screen, it gives you the information of the passing of the scenes and also the death toll. That could have done with either being at the back of the stage or to the sides for it to be more visibly clear for everyone. But in terms of the content, I feel it would have been ideal if they'd have had more of the scenes of them reading the 8 commandments, or the writing of the commandment where Squealer was found with the paint tin writing or altering them. Because we only had it a couple of times where Clover would say, but that's against animals killing animals. That's on one of the commandments. But it was never seen.
No,
It was referenced, but not seen.
And there was no reference to them being changed or altered to suit the pigs. Whereas that would have been better if either it was projected on one of the tabs at the side, just to reference those commandments, because they were key to the production in a way.
So that was a down bit. I would have liked to have seen more of that. I would have liked to have seen the donkey rather than the goat be Benjamin. And also, the cat never read the commandments at all. It was Muriel the goat and Clover reading it. But I suppose because they never had the commandments written down, it was easier for them to say that the cat went and saw them written down. Because I suppose because they had brickwork at the back of the stage that represented something else, they probably didn't want to write on that or utilise that. But just have another tab.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe.
Yeah.
As for the upstage, what went right with it, I just thought everything went right with it, to be honest. I was so bowled over by the actual technical aspect, the puppetry and the moving about.
Definitely.
And more so the sound effects and the lighting and how it just immersed me in this story that they were saying.
But it was also not overdone in the sense of the lighting and sound wasn't in your face. It was just integral to the performance.
It was very much in my face.
Yeah, but when I mean it wasn't in your face, it was very much, you just accepted it was there as it was meant to be. It felt right. There was not a lot of technical equipment on stage, really. You couldn't really, apart from the obstructions in front of us, everything on stage was very much about Animal Farm. Even to the point where they'd created a false wall at the back where you believed it was the back of the stage, when actually it was still part of the production, and that was clever, that was. They broke through that back wall, and there was just simply lights behind that to create the effect of an explosion and things like that just added to it fueled it, it just made it feel right.
During the end of the scene, there was a conversation between Clover and her daughter, the new calf, talking about what the revolution was like, and we could see Clover not really remembering, but remembering there was something that happened, and then it went to black. Normally in the book, it was the pigs having this conversation with the farmers and the animals looking in, but they didn't do that. But when it went to a blackout, there was awkwardness during this matinee performance. I wanted to clap. Everyone wanted to clap, I think, but it's like, is that it? Is that the end? But then it became even more awkward because even more time had passed. No one moved on the stage, and then it was like, okay, we're going to have to clap now because this is it.
Because obviously it was just an open black stage. You could tell there was puppeteers were still stood on stage, and nobody knew what to do. And I think they could have just done with somebody planted in the audience to start the clapping off, so we knew that was the end of the production.
And for those performers, they must think, this is it, people, start clapping, because we're not moving until you clap. Yes, I mean, that was a little bit awkward, but that's not to say that how it ended wasn't good.
No, not
you could see, I knew, because that's probably how I'd end a show. That's how I would have done it. But because an air of silence just engulfed the audience, it's a very British thing. I'm not going to be the first one to clap.
Somebody needs to start.
I can't do it. I'm not going to be the one to be the idiot that starts clapping, and then there's another scene.
It was a very awkward silence. It was very, very awkward silence.
Yes, but well done to all involved in that one. And now for our ratings, as we say,
call this a show.
So Rich, what's your final thoughts on this particular piece?
Well, I felt that it was an excellent piece of theatre. It was a total unexpected because I didn't know what to expect, and it was a masterclass in puppetry, sound, lighting, and it's definitely something I would watch again.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was bowled over. I knew the story well. I was entertained from the minute from Mr. Jones walking out with half a dead pig. I knew I was going to enjoy this, and it did not let me down at all. So, with that being said, scores on the doors for this one, Richard, out of 10. What are you going to give this one?
Well, I'm just going to give it a 9, purely because it's going to be a 9 purely because of the technical decision to put lighting and speakers on the front of the stage. I think that is the only thing that
but was that their fault? If you saw this in another...
I personally, I think they could have done it differently.
Them down
I'm marking them down because they should be prepared. Touring productions should know that they have to do something to fit every stage, and there are ways to do what they did.
They're going to be annoyed now that you sat on the front row.
There's always room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. improvement.
So I'm not
going
to let a couple of little bits like that ruin this thing. And this is a 10 out of 10 for me. This is the pinnacle of what puppetry should be. This is the first time I've seen something like this, and this is amazing. So any other puppetry I see in the future has got to live up to this kind of standard, because it wasn't just the puppetry, it was the sounds, it was the effects, it was the staging, it was the utilising of everything, and the directing. And shout out to all the cast, every single one of them that was puppeteers. I can't name you all, but you were all brilliant.
You did a really, really good job.
And I thoroughly enjoyed this one. So, what sound effect will you be choosing from the following? A complete train wreck, tumbleweed, an audible shrug of the shoulders, a slow clap, a pleasant applause, or a standing ovation. What will it be?
Well, it can only be a standing ovation.
It's got to be a standing ovation from me as well.
It's just got to be. It's deserved everything. All the work that they've put into it has paid off.
Yes, definitely a standing ovation for me. This was hands down one of the best pieces of theatre I've ever seen.
So, there we are. That's our discussion of Animal Farm, and we hope you found it insightful.
If not entertaining.
Coming up over the next few episodes, we'll be discussing the new production of First Touch,
Ladies of Letters,
as well as the new play Red Ellen.
That's it for this week, folks.
If you'd like to drop us a message, please email us at upstagedowstagepod@gmail.com. Remember, you can always join in the chat to share with us your views on a production.
Also, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you get every episode the second it's released. And we hope you join us again for another instalment of Upstage Downstage.